Hello guys, and welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program video. Today we are going to be going to the moon Vall of the Jool system. It's one of my favorite places to visit in Kerbal Space Program. It's not as popular as some other places. You know, Duna gets a lot of visits, you know, Eve because it's so hard, Tylo, you know, because it has no atmosphere, very hard to land on, and Lathe, of course, has a breathable atmosphere. But Vall is sort of like a little minty moon, outside of Minmus, of course. It's not too hard to get to, not too hard to land on. It has some pretty cool cryovolcanoes, at least if you have the DLC. And so, personally, it's one of my favorite places to visit. You can see we're sending a small rover. This is similar in design to the rovers I've delivered to the Mun and also Duna. It's a little bit different. It has different wheels because I think that it could definitely use a wider base. The other sort of rovers had a flipping problem. This one, not so much. It's very stable, especially for Vall's lower gravity. And so that is where we're going. So this mission will sort of give a guide on gravity assists. We're not going to be using any gravity assists to get to Jool. And we're not going to be using any gravity assists to get back from Jool, but we are going to be using gravity assists to slow down at Jool and mostly circularize. We'll have to do a little bit of burning. So if you're struggling with any interplanetary gravity assists, you know, maybe try this first. I always recommend when people are trying to learn gravity assists to go to Jool and just sort of play around with it, experiment. Interplanetary gravity assists, you can't really do that. There's, you know, much larger distances that you're covering. But with this mission, it shouldn't be too hard to practice your gravity assists and save some delta V. Worst case scenario, you know, you can just use the XX delta V. So if you are building this craft, I might even provide a craft file. If you are, you know, rebuilding or using this craft, you certainly have plenty of delta V, even if you don't use any gravity assists. I did build it more delta V into this craft, but, you know, if you want to practice them, it's a great craft to practice with. So you can see me here constructing the lander, the rover, and putting it on top of the rocket. Now, this craft really has quite a bit more delta V than it really needs. When going back to Kerbin, I used quite a bit of it instead of aerobraking to mostly circularize and capture at Kerbin instead of aerobraking because I didn't want to spend all day, you know, finding that Goldilocks zone so we didn't burn up in the atmosphere. But all in all, this mission went over pretty well. And I must mention that my post on Reddit with the yesterday's video, the space station video, sort of got a lot of upvotes and a lot of people subscribed. So hey everybody, and I'm glad you like my videos. I got a lot of positive feedback, and, you know, I just like making these videos, and I'm glad some people like watching them. You know, I don't do it because I'm, you know, trying to become anything. I genuinely enjoy making these. They're fun to edit, fun to fly, and I just sort of like sharing my creations on Kerbal, and I'm glad people like hearing me and watching me. So thanks you guys for just, you know, coming along with the ride. So here we are. We've put it into a fairing, although now it's back out of the fairing. There are going to be, I'll preface this and warn you, a few hard cuts in this video because I lost some of the footage. I don't know why, but Fraps was, you know, messing around and not recording certain bits. So I went back and recorded the bits that it didn't, but of course there's going to be some hard cuts because the footage doesn't exactly line up. So, like for instance, when we're coming back from the Jool system to Kerbin, on our re-entry, there is a hard cut where I did it once and then did it another time. So it shouldn't be too, you know, shocking or whatnot, but I just do want to preface this that there are a few, one or two, hard cuts. Also, our Jool rendezvous, I did not record excess, so there's just no, or not Jool rendezvous, Vall rendezvous. So there's no lander rendezvousing with the mothercraft. It's just we launch up and then it's automatically rendezvoused. So here's the rocket here. I kind of skipped over most of the build. It has two Clydesdale boosters and a Mammoth engine. providing a pretty low thrust-to-weight ratio. Of course, this footage is now sped up. But I did like this rocket. I like using the new Clydesdale boosters. I guess they're not really new, 1.9, but they're certainly a joy to use. They provide a lot of thrust and just sort of a kick off the pad for a little bit. Now, we did, of course, use my favorite engine in the game, the Mammoth engine, as a second stage, and that will also get us most of the way to Jool. We'll have to do a little bit of burning with the nuclear engine, but outside of that, this craft was really fun. For once, we are using Vall. I think we used Vall in our Drez video, but outside of that, I don't think we've used Vall. Jeb, I had to use Vall in this case because Jeb, if you remember from last episode, is on the space station right now. So we couldn't use him, so we're using Bill and Jeb, or Bill and Vall, rather. And incidentally, we are going to Vall, so I'm sure Vall will love to visit her own little moon. Here I'm using a transfer window planner just to get the correct transfer window from Kerbin to Jool. It's like 80-something degrees. I'll flash it on screen here. And it's really, it's not too hard to get transfer windows. If you've already been following along with the series, you should have been to Gilly and Drez and Duna. So, you should sort of have a grasp on transfer windows by now. If you don't, I'd recommend you go back and watch those videos just to sort of give you some guides on this video before you're attempting anything like the Jool system. So you might have noticed there that I didn't burn halfway before my maneuver node, and that is because if I did, I would have re-entered the atmosphere. So I waited a little bit past that, and now we're just burning to get our apoapsis all the way up to Jool. We're really just looking for a rough encounter now, and then we'll do some correction burns in interplanetary space, just to sort of even out our encounter with Jool. Now, I will say that when we did do our gravity assist to capture at Jool, Tylo was in a really bad place to do it. So most people use a gravity assist off of Tylo, and you can actually see me sort of playing around with that maneuver node there. Most people use Tylo to capture at Jool. We couldn't do that because Tylo was in a really bad place to get a decent capture gravity assist. So we actually used Lathe. We used Lathe, the first gravity assist, to get us almost captured, and then we burned up periaps to get the rest of the way captured and saved quite a bit of delta V on that. And then we used one more gravity assist off Lathe to lower our periaps enough. So there's our Lathe encounter, you can see there. And we ended up saving quite a bit of delta V. Our burn to finish off the capture was about 400 meters per second, so not perfect, but we certainly saved some delta V with this gravity assist. We're just lining up, trying to get a very low gravity assist on Lathe. If you're trying to get gravity assists, look at the direction that the planet is orbiting, right? So in really all of the case, they're going counterclockwise for Jool. You want to, if you're passing in front of that planet, or moon in this case, right? Think about what that's going to do to your craft. It's going to pull you, right, if you're passing in front of it, and it's going to speed you up, right? But if you're or slow you down, rather. If you're passing behind it, it's going to do the opposite. And so how it affects your craft, it'll either add or subtract to the momentum of your craft by pulling a little bit of the gravity away from that planet. Of course, Kerbal Space Program doesn't actually simulate that, but the smaller things that we might get in Kerbal Space Program too. So our we have a little bit of an inclined encounter with Lathe, but it's not too big of a deal because we are almost capturing, and then of course we'll plot our maneuver node and do the rest of the capturing here. And that maneuver node we just barely captured, and it's about a 400 meter per second burn. Not a big problem though, not a big problem. And we are saving a significant amount of delta V there. So we are almost at Jool, and we could, I think next mission, next episode, we are going to be going to the Mohole, because I think the Mohole is a really fun place to visit. Or we could plot a relay network, lay out a relay network, Where we would send that, I don't know. Just let me know. Other than that, I don't really have any ideas. We'll, of course, visit everywhere once, and maybe even twice if we want to set up a base or something. But, you know, as far as I'm concerned, where we're going next, you guys will just have to let me know. I'm thinking maybe Elu, past the Mohole, of course. I'm definitely wanting to do next. Because Elu is really far out, and then we might work on some SSTO work. SSTOs are generally an area where a lot of people struggle, and I still struggle. I mean, of course, by no means I'm perfect at this game. I still have a lot to learn. In fact, if you guys see any, like, inefficient burns throughout this video, just please let me know, and I'd be sure to, adjust accordingly, because I'm by no means perfect at this game. And we'll get back to the video here. We are doing a small burn here during our ascent up to Apoapsis to get a decent Lathe encounter that will use the gravity of Lathe to pull ourselves way down and lower our periaps, or Apoapsis rather, around Jool to roughly Vall height. You can see there. Playing around with maneuver nodes again, and we're trying to get a Vall encounter, and we do end up getting it. We are on a bit of a resonance with Lathe right now. So I am having to burn a little bit prograde just so I can get out of any Lathe resonance, because we were at a bit of a point in which every orbit we would encounter Lathe, which is a bit of a problem considering we don't want to land on Lathe and our periaps is low enough. So there we go. We have our encounter with Vall and are lowering our periaps. I would recommend going for 20 to 30 kilometers around Vall. You could go for lower. Of course, it doesn't have an atmosphere, but you don't want to risk hitting any high mountains that Vall has. So, 20 to 30 kilometers is a good range if your lander can handle it. If you need a lower because you don't have a very powerful lander with a low delta V, you can do a little bit lower, but you don't want to risk hitting any mountains. So, because our circularization burn would be inefficient, if we burned the entire time, we're just going to burn just enough to capture, and then we're going to do another burn on the next orbit, because we don't want to waste our delta V circularizing already. We could circularize now, but it's most efficient to circularize and burn at periaps, and of course we would like to be the most efficient. So there we go, and we're just going to lower all the way down and get a nice circular orbit around Vall. Vall is really nice. I like visiting the Jool system now a lot, especially since in the 1.10 update, Jool and Lathe both got graphics overhauls. I don't think they did Vall. I don't think they've done Vall yet, but I would certainly be open to them getting to that eventually. I really like the Jool system at this point. Jool is just such a pretty place to visit. Lathe is a great place, but I hate landing in Lathe because, the best way to land on Lathe is usually with some sort of space plane, because, of course, with its atmosphere, you have to sort of glide to an island unless you want to spend a bunch of attempts, trying to land on one of its few islands. So here we are in the lander. It's sort of the sky crane design that I've used in the Duna and Mun video. So we will, of course, be dropping it and then boosting up a little bit and then landing beside the rover. And, of course, using those Twitch engines. I think we have 8 of them here with the 8 landing legs. And this really does dampen our landing, and it's a great lander design that I really like for deploying rovers. And here we are. We have, wait for it, touchdown on the surface of Vall. Valentina is going to go ahead and get out and plant the mandatory flag on the surface of Vall. And then, as you can see with the rover, we have those little scanning arms on the side. We are going to go and try and find a cryovolcano to scan. I think the cryovolcanoes are pretty much the coolest surface features in the new update with the Breaking Ground, or DLC rather. So we're going to go and try and find a cryovolcano. They're actually really hard to find. I think if you zoom out, you can sort of see the plumes, and that's the best way I found. Oh, and here the reaction wheels are freaking out, so we're setting it to SAS only, so we can actually drive the rover. So the cryovolcanoes are actually kind of hard to find. You have to sort of zoom out and look for the plumes, and I see one over there, so I'm like, all right, that's a cryovolcano. And we get on the way. It's about 3 kilometers away in total, so it's not too bad. And this rover can go about 20 meters per second in total. Of course, I am using 2 times time warp. Any faster than that, and the rover sort of glitches out and krakens off into space. So we did want to only use time warp in a conservative fashion. So I do really like the cryovolcanoes, and we're coming up on it now. It's definitely my favorite surface feature, but they are kind of rare, so you'll have to sort of look around and find them. And here is the cryovolcano. Really cool, although I wish they were a little bit bigger, so you could, actively sort of drive up them and put a little rover in, but it's not bad, and we'll go ahead and scan it in a second here, driving up alongside, and I think Vall will end up taking a surface sample from inside the cryovolcano. Fortunately, she doesn't get too cold inside the volcano. And there's that scanning arm action. I just love the look of that scanning arm. It's so cool. Taking some science, although of course this is a sandbox world, so we don't really need the science, but hey, it's extra points in this video game, right? And we have Valentina getting up there and taking that surface sample, EVA packing, and taking some thumbnails. So I won't bore you guys. I took a lot of thumbnails here because, I wanted to get a good shot for the thumbnail. But here we are, finished that off, and we've had to recharge the batteries in the rover. One thing I do regret sort of with this rover design, and we'll have to turn back on the SAS so we can flip it back over, is we did not pack an RTG on this rover. We packed a bunch of RTGs on the main craft, on that lander, and on the mothership, but none on the rover. We had to rely on solar panels, and the solar panels this far out are not very effective. I think at Jool they're about 5% as effective as relative to Kerbin. So pack an RTG is the life lesson here, because the solar panels did take absolutely ages to recharge. And here we are. We have completed our surface operations on the moon Vall, and we'll have Valentina get back into that lander, and our mothership is almost directly ahead of us, so we can go ahead and zoom up and rendezvous with the mothership. Now, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, I guess the footage was just lost, and so we don't actually have footage of the rendezvous. This wasn't actually this was sort of my second attempt, and now we're in the mothership. See, unfortunately, the rendezvous footage was lost. I don't know where it went, really. It just didn't show up in the file when I was editing this video. But not a problem. We have Valentina back aboard the mothership, and we are going to go home. Now, I could have used a gravity assist off somewhere like Tylo to get a more efficient return, except we had plenty of Delta V, and I don't really want to drag this video on any longer. It's already one of my longest videos, so we can burn back to Kerbin and do it a little less efficiently than we could have. We use Transfer Window Planner there. Again, totally recommend that mod to burn back to Kerbin, although honestly, from this far out, transfer windows don't make too big of a difference. I could have just brute forced it with the amount of Delta V this craft has, but again, I wanted to be a little bit more efficient since we're not using a gravity assist, so we did use a transfer window to return, taking a little screenshot there, and now we are burning all the way back to Kerbin. I think this mission went pretty well. I do like Vall, and I think at some point I'd like to set up some sort of surfaced outpost on Vall, maybe built around one of those cryovolcanoes. Just a little neat idea. And we have our encounter with, or not quite an encounter, but close enough, with Kerbin. Just fine-tuning that so we can return to Kerbin. Serious problem, though, from this far out, is that you're coming in at extremely high speeds. And so I could have aerobraked, but I really didn't want to risk the heating on that heat shield, because, if you do it too high, like 50 to 70 kilometers, you're just going to skim out through the atmosphere, and you're still going to be on escape trajectory. But if you do it too low, like 45 to 0 kilometers, and you're gonna burn up. So there's like a very thin range where you can survive re-entry from that far out. I could have been, it's even worse with Elu when you're even further out. But for Jool, you still want to be very cautious when re-entering. So I ended up doing a retrograde burn to circularize around Kerbin. You can see me here sort of fiddling around with the burns so I can get a decent encounter. I ended up just burning for an equatorial orbit and then straightening it out to a somewhat equatorial orbit, or passing through the Kerbin sphere of influence, and we'll go ahead and circularize. We won't entirely circularize, we'll slow down, capture, and then we will eventually re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere. So we'll go ahead and time warp down all the way, almost to Kerbin. There we go, we've entered the sphere of influence. There we go, time warping all the way down. Decouple those. They still had a little bit of fuel in them, but I wanted the higher thrust to weight ratio with just this single tank, single nuclear engine, and I think it was more effective, and plus we had plenty of excess delta V, so we could decouple those way early. And we have decoupled the pod, but it sort of got stuck on that. I forgot to throttle down, and here we are. As I said, there is a bit of a cut, and we forgot the parachutes on the pod again. This is the second mission in this series where I've forgotten the parachutes. So Bill is parachuting down to meet with Vall on the surface of Kerbin. So that will wrap up today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave suggestions down below or in the Reddit comments where you guys want me to go next, and I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.